Well, hey, ladies and gentlemen, it's me, Jermaine, and I'm back with another Simple Truth update. And I want to share something with you from an article that I found on naturalnews.com, one of the independent news sources that I utilize and that I uh, refer to when I do a lot of the Simple Truth updates. And would it even be in the realm of possibility that the mainstream media would ever do anything because they're paid to do it? Oh, that couldn't happen. That would go against all the rules of journalism and the free press. Well, if that be the case, then what I'm going to share with you right now is definitely going to surprise you if you believe that that couldn't happen. But for those of us that have a bit more of a broad ranging view of things and we just don't take things at face value, this article is going to speak to us and confirm and maybe enlighten some others. Well, the title of the article is Bombshell. CNN takes money from foreign dictators to run flattering news stories about them. And the article goes on to say, those of you who are regular readers of Natural News, and your numbers are many, may not always agree with points of view expressed here, but we believe you at least consider us a trustworthy news source. A point driven home by the tens of millions of page views we receive every month. That said, how much trust would you place in us if, say, we were being paid to put out certain information or relate only a singular point of view? We're guessing the number would be much, much smaller. Yet, that's what one establishment media organization, CNN, appears to be doing. Multiple sources who say the network has begun engaging in a practice of killing stories that portray governments and countries which have become the network's sugar daddies in a bad light. Silencing government response to the Arab Spring. In March 2011, you may recall, much of the Middle East began to erupt. This Arab Spring, as the general movement has been labeled, began as simple protests by seething opposition groups against longtime Arab dictators, but soon exploded into full-fledged revolution, and in the case of Libya and Syria, civil war. Early on, CNN sent a 4-person crew to Bahrain to do an investigative piece on the use of the internet technologies and social media by democracy activists in the region. Glenn Greenwald of Britain's The Guardian newspaper reported in September. The team, led by veteran reporter Amber Lyon, a 3-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, had a most eventful 8-day stay in the small Washington-backed kingdom, which is home, by the way, to the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet. By the time Lyon and her crew arrived, a number of sources who had previously agreed to speak to them had either disappeared or took to hiding. Opponents of the Bahraini regime who did speak to them suffered government-led recriminations, as did ordinary citizens who worked with them as fixers, Greenwald wrote. It made clear just how willing the regime is to lie. In one case, leading human rights activist Nabil Rajab was arrested for allegedly fabricating a photo of a dead man who appears to be on a table in a medical examiner's office. In another case, Saeed Ayad, a doctor who gave the crew a tour of his village before arranging meetings with government opponents, had his house burned down shortly thereafter. In still another case, the crew's local fixer was fired 10 days after working with them. Lyon and her crew were even violently detained by agents of the regime in front of Rajab's house. I keep mispronouncing that name. They later described the encounter after returning to the U.S. as being accosted by 20 heavily armed men whose faces were covered with black ski masks and who jumped from military vehicles before they pointed machine guns at them, then forcing them all to the ground. The security forces proceeded to seize the crew's cameras, deleting photos and video footage before interrogating them against their will for 6 hours. This sounds vaguely familiar. Man, what is it where people can use a security force and detain people and violate their human rights, their civil rights, their constitution? That's it, the NDAA. Oh, okay, let me get back to this article. The experience both shocked and emboldened Lyon, Greenwald wrote. Following the morning after the detention, she said newspapers in the kingdom predominantly featured reports about the incident that contained what she described as outright fabrications by the government. It made clear just how willing the regime is to lie, Lyon told Greenwald last month. But the episode strengthened her resolve as well. She committed to exposing how abusive and thug-like the regime had become in attempting to squash the fledgling democracy movement, as well as any negative coverage of the government's inevitable response. I realized there was a correlation between the amount of media attention activists receive and the regime's ability to harm them. So I felt an obligation to show the world what our sources, who risked their lives to talk to us, were facing, she said. CNN's cost for the team to travel to Bahrain to get the story was north of $100,000, an unusually high amount for a 1-hour program of this type, according to The Guardian. The story was titled, "iRevolution: Online Warriors in the Arab Spring," and it took up a 13-minute segment of the program. Now that is available, it says here in the article, on YouTube. Now, per Greenwald, and he says, in the segment, Lyon interviewed activists as they explicitly described their torture at the hands of the government forces. Torture? Government forces? NDAA. What? In the segment, Lyon interviewed activists as they explicitly described their torture at the hands of government forces. Torture at the hands of government forces, while family members recounted their relatives' abrupt disappearances. She spoke with government officials justifying the imprisonment of the activists, and the segment featured harrowing video footage of regime forces shooting unarmed demonstrators, along with the mass arrests of peaceful protesters. What? In sum, the early 2011 CNN segment on Bahrain presented one of the starkest reports to date of the brutal repression embraced by the U.S.-backed regime. The highly award-winning segment, which was praised by thousands of Bahrainis on Facebook as well, aired just once in the U.S. Internationally, on CNN's sister network, CNNI, it never aired. An expensive piece of hard-hitting, award-winning journalism never aired overseas. And the question is, why? Government sponsorship of reporting. CNN-I has aggressively pursued a business strategy of extensive, multifaceted financial arrangements between the network and several of the most repressive regimes around the world, which the network purports to cover, writes Greenwald. Its financial dealings with Bahrain are deep and long-standing. Specifically, he notes the network aggressively pursued and then came to rely on revenue from several Middle East regimes in order to remain viable, especially after the 2008 economic recession, which caused the network to suffer significant losses in corporate sponsorships. The result, the employment of journalistically dubious ways to earn revenue from the very governments the network was created to cover. The arrangement goes far beyond simple advertising agreements. According to CNN, programming is produced in what the network describes as an in association with type of arrangement with a government. These programs are then featured as part of CNN-I's so-called Eye On series. Eye on Georgia, Eye on the Philippines, Eye on Poland, for example, or Marketplace Middle East, all of which is designed to tout the positive economic, social, and political features of that country, says Greenwald. As you might have guessed, disclosure of these arrangements is often deft and wholly unnoticeable by all but the most trained journalistic eye. In mid-July, Miles Smith, a Central Asia-based consultant, pointed out that a series CNN-I produced on oil-rich Kazakhstan was similarly skewed and similarly government-sponsored. Paid coverage is akin to tainted coverage. Most of the spots are quirky, soft-core reportage and travelogue sprinkled with carefully framed shots of the glitziest parts of Astana and Almaty. I may have mispronounced those. Topics include economic diversification, transportation, infrastructure, skiing, and dating games, he writes. CNN International offers no coverage of labor strikes, human rights abuses, nascent violent insurgencies. Might have mispronounced that one too. Bear with me, people. Violence against women, or any other diversions from the narrative of relentless growth and limitless opportunity. Smith notes, what looks to the unsuspecting viewer like more of CNN at its finest appears in fact to be sponsored advertisements paid for by none other than the Kazakhstan's oil-rich government. As for Lyon, she says that China and many other foreign authoritarian regimes also pay CNN and other mainstream networks to run flowery, flattering propaganda pieces. And what's more, she says a number of reporters and producers at the network have privately complained about the paid sponsorship of programming, but believe they can't complain publicly out of fear they will be blacklisted within the news industry and branded troublemakers. Couple this revelation with our earlier coverage of an admission by the New York Times that many mainstream media stories are actually scripted by the White House, and you get a sense of why Natural News and a number of other leading alternative sites are where information consumers are increasingly turning for honest reporting. Now, when they talked about the New York Times admitting that the White House or a different political campaign skews what they say and changes certain things. I reported on that as well from this source. But ladies and gentlemen, the simple truth of the whole matter is that we have to quit depending upon the mainstream or the powers to be to provide us the actual truth. Truth is something that in this world we have to truly search for. And if you don't search for it, trust and believe, you will not get it. I want to thank you for joining me for the simple truth. And as I always tell you, the simple things are oftentimes the most profound, but yet they're the most difficult to put into practice and to actually do. And I'll see you and you again real soon.